So here we are talking about how to evict a tenant, and I'm going to break it down to you in about 14 steps. Now, disclosure, this is for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania area. It is different in many areas, and there's many things to consider because this is for residential and commercial property units. It does not include mobile home parks or self-storage. And I'll go over the mobile home parks at the end of this video, so you want to stay tuned. There's only a few differences, but I want to go over that separately. So we're going to start with number one. Number one, you need to have a written lease that's signed by all tenants. Specifically, anyone over the age of 18 has to have their name on the lease, and they must sign the lease. Number two, rent is always due on the first of the month. Don't have scattered payment dates. Everyone pays their rent on the first. I don't treat anybody different. I'm not violating fair housing laws. Rent is always due on the first of the month. Number three, rent is always late on the second of the month. And that scares a lot of people because some people, Social Security, don't get it till the third of the month. Say, just calm down and let me explain the whole process to you. At least that's what I used to do. And so what you do is you tell them your rent is due on the first of the month. There's no exceptions. On the second, you're already late. I don't charge you late fees until the 6th of the month. So again, let's go over it. You have a written lease, number one. Number two, your rent is due on the first of every month. Number three, your rent is late on the third of the month. Number four, the grace period ends on the 5th. And when I come into the office on the 6th, I charge you a late fee. 8 a.m. on the 6th, I'm going to charge you a late fee. Next, you want to document any calls that you make to them to collect rent. In their file, you want to send them a late notice or email. Hey, I haven't received your rent. You now have a late fee. I'm advising you that you need to pay your rent immediately. Typically, what you want to do is start the clock right there, because if you haven't heard back from them that same day, by the end of the 6th of the month, at 8 a.m., you charge them a late fee. By 5 p.m., you want to generate a notice to quit. So the notice to quit is your 7th part of this. So notice to quit should be a 10-day notice. And specifically, this is for non-payment of rent. So if you're evicting for any other reason, for example, you're trying to end the lease and they're on a month-to-month, well, then you have to give them a 30-day notice. But for this example, I'm talking about non-payment of rent. So they didn't pay you rent on the first. They were late on the second. You charged them a late fee on the 6th, and you sent a notice to quit by the end of the day on the 6th. So what you want to do from there is you do a notice to quit. It's 10 days, right? So that takes you out to the 16th of the month. The 16th of the month, that is number 8 on our list of 14 things. Number 8, you file for eviction. And I broke this down in 2 steps because number 9 is filling out the landlord-tenant complaint. So what I used to do with the landlord-tenant complaints is I'd ask that district justice for 2 copies of their landlord-tenant complaint. And I'd always take one with me, make copies, keep like 10 in each file for each district justice. And so that way, when I go to file on a tenant, I already have their landlord-tenant complaints in my file so that I can just pull it out and fill it out real quick. You can also download a PDF from online for the district justices, but then you have to fill in the district justice information. If you ask the district justice, that part will already be filled out. So when you make copies, you're filling it out on the form that already has their information on it. Otherwise, you'll have to type in the district justice number and all that information at the top. So whatever you prefer, if you prefer to type out on a PDF, or if you prefer, to have a written, just write them out, that's fine too. Obviously, they'll accept it either way. So number 10 on our 14-part process on how to evict a tenant, number 10 is if you do not own that property, you need an authorization to represent. Now, you can't just go and represent a landlord if you don't have that authorization to represent. Some district justices will literally throw the case out without that. Some district justices will be upset that you don't submit it at the time you submit the landlord-tenant complaint to advise the court ahead of time that you're representing that landlord. So those are some important things. I always still file it when you file the landlord-tenant complaint, just attach it when you take it in. The other thing is I always filled out an authorization to represent if it's an LLC, because they might say, well, how do I know that you have a permission to represent that LLC? You're representing a corporation, and so you need to have an authorization to represent. A way around that is if you're the sole member in that LLC, then you can just bring a copy of your LLC documents that you submitted to the state. And then that can prove that you're the sole member of that LLC, so you don't need an authorization to represent yourself. So that's important step. Make sure you don't skip that. Now we're to the point where when they send you your documentation telling you when you have a hearing, so obviously you show up at that hearing, right? You want to make sure you attend it, put it on your calendar, don't mix it up with other dates. We all know as a landlord, you're pulled in 10 different directions all the time, right? So make sure as soon as you know that date and time, sometimes the district justice office will actually tell you the date and time that they're going to print it up. Put it on your calendar right away so that you know that you have to be there that day. You don't want to miss any hearings and then end up having to wait another 10 days for a hearing or something. So when you prepare for this hearing, I broke down step 11 into 4 parts. So first you want to take your tenant file, take everything you have paperwork-wise on that tenant, take that with you when you go to the hearing. The second process is make sure you print out your tenant ledger. So hopefully, I encourage you to use a software system of some kind, whether it be Buildium, Yardi, or Appfolio. You need to have a software system. It looks so much better when you go to court. If you don't come in with something written on a napkin, you should have something that is printed out from a software system to show all money you've received for this tenant from their security deposit onward. And if you're suing them for non-payment of rent, which is what this video is about, then specifically you want to make sure that you bring the tenant ledger with you. So what I always did was I printed out 3 copies because that's your evidence, right? You're going to hand a copy to the judge to prove that this tenant owes you money. Second part is I always hand a copy to the tenant so that they can see the evidence that I just presented to the judge. And third, you want to keep one in your file, right? Because you're going to keep that as your justification as you're talking about the case. You didn't receive X number of days or months of rent, late fees, pet fees, whatever is on the ledger. And so you also want to take a copy of the move-in inspection, because hopefully if you're doing it right, and we'll cover this stuff in another video, but if you're doing it right, you're actually doing a move-in inspection in person with them, and they're signing that move-in inspection that they're justifying that the property is in decent shape when they move in. They're not saying anything's wrong with the place. Or if they did, you can attach the completed work orders from whatever they complained about. When you go to court, bring those as well. And finally, the last thing that is important to do is if you specifically know that the tenant is going to bring up problems or condition in the property, specifically maintenance issues and stuff like that, you want to make sure that you ask a vendor or your maintenance technician, whoever is completing the maintenance work on your property, that can justify or back up, your claim that the property does not have those issues and that they've completed all open maintenance work orders for that apartment. So I generally didn't bring them unless I knew that it was going to be a bigger case, or if a tenant hired an attorney or something like that, then I would bring backup so that I can, hopefully strengthen my case to win. Another thing about the hearings and stuff is when you go there, every judge is different. They don't generally follow the law. That's the God's honest truth. You'll find it out if you go to court that they all make up their own rules, really. They don't follow the letter of the law, that's for sure. When you go there, some people will say, like the tenant will start complaining and saying, I had a problem, where they didn't paint correctly before I moved in and yada, and they'll go on and on. And see, the judge is an elected official and he's trying to stay in office. So he wants to justify, like, I'm standing up for the tenant. And those are the people that are voting for him, right? They live in his jurisdiction where you might not, right? And so he's trying to stand up for the people that voted him in office, right? So he makes up his own rules where he'll say, well, just because you didn't paint the place before they moved in, I'm going to take $400 off of the balance that you're saying they owe. That's not the law. They're not allowed to do that. And in fact, they're really not even supposed to hear the tenant's side unless they filed, in opposition of if their plan is to defend against the fact that they owe rent, they're supposed to put a counterclaim in against you. Like if they're saying it's something besides rent, so they're filing saying the conditions of the property make it uninhabitable, then, they should be filing a counterclaim. And the judge is not even supposed to hear that side of the story. And I've had judges stop them and say, hey, you did not file a counterclaim. You cannot bring those things up. Don't show me no pictures. Don't show me no videos because you didn't file a counterclaim. That's the way the law reads. Doesn't mean that the judge is always going to enforce that. He wants to seem like he's at least being open to both sides of the story. But also the tenant can't just withhold rent because you didn't fix something. That's not the way the law reads. The law reads, at least in my area, that you have to put that in an escrow account through the pathonetary's office. You can't just withhold rent and say, hey, I don't like this guy. He didn't come fix my door. You can't, that's not the way it works. And so you signed a legal binding document stating that you were going to pay that person rent. You can't just find whatever reason in the property to use that to not pay rent because it's not the way it works, especially when it's not preventing you from living there or using that property. So we finished basically a quick rundown of what happens in court. The judge will sometimes say, immediately that, the landlord has won, or they'll dismiss the case if you didn't prepare properly or whatever. But you'll get the letter in the mail that states the judgment in the favor of the landlord normally. I would also say before I go on here that it's one of the parts of being a property manager and landlord that I hate the most because of that difference. So every judge makes their own rules and doesn't really follow what they're supposed to. And occasionally you have a good judge that actually follows the law. And in those cases, it's a lot easier when the judge actually follows the law. You have some judges that will literally almost threaten to throw the case out because you wear shorts or jeans into his courtroom. I always wear dress pants when I go to court anyway, so you should go in and dress the part, right? If you're running, properties, especially millions of dollars in real estate, you shouldn't go in like you're heading to the pool or something. Dress the part. You're going into a courtroom. And so I've had people say, judges tell, you sit in there and watch these landlords come in not dressed professionally, and it's not a good idea. So make sure you dress the part if you're going to court. And so after you have received that mail from the court stating that judgment is in your favor, 10 days after that hearing, you can file for order for possession. And that's open for a while there, but you don't want to play around. Don't wait. If after 10 days after the hearing, they still haven't paid you, which means you had a 10-day notice to quit, plus the rent was due on the 1st to begin with, you're almost the end of the month already and they haven't paid you. So don't play around and say, oh, I'm going to give them an extra week. File it immediately. It's called an order for possession. And again, You can download that form, do it in PDF format. You can also make copies when you receive one from a district justice. Just ask them for an order for possession. And so you can just fill them out, go in, pay the next set of fees. So you pay a fee when you file, you pay a fee for the order for possession. Most court systems in our area, you have to pay the constable fee for the lockout at this time. But some will only charge you and only let you pay for the order for possession because they don't want you to prepay for the next process. So then in 11 days after that, or specifically 21 days from the hearing date, is when the constable will actually come out. So when you receive that paperwork returned to you from filing the order for possession, it will actually have the lockout date and everything on there. Now, what you want to do is either call in and ask the district justice for the constable's phone number so that you can confirm an actual date and time for sure. And you can be super organized about it, right? And when you go in the first time to file for the order for possession and you ask them for those forms, ask them for the constable information up front, ask them for the order for possession up front and the landlord tenant complaint. So you have everything. If you're going to be filing for multiple properties in that jurisdiction, you might as well have everything up front, right? Okay, so 21 days from the date that you had the hearing that the judge has ordered, that you can take possession of the property is when the constable comes out to lock it out. Again, try to push to stay strict on that. Don't wait any extra days. Try to push the constable to come on the specific day that you're allowed to do it. And so you want to be prepared for that day, bring the unit keys with you and bring new locks or bring a maintenance technician or a locksmith to come and meet you at the property at the same time. So when the constable's still there, if the tenant's still there, whatever, you want to try to limit any type of a fight or things like that. So just get everything done at one time. Certainly secure the unit, make sure you check all the windows and make sure everything's locked because, they'll come back in the property. If you left something open, they'll come back in the property. So secure the property, change the locks, document everything, do a move out inspection, both with videos and photos so that you have proof of the condition of the property on the day the constable was there. And the constable can also back you up and state the condition of the property if the tenant would come back and sue you. So it's always good to walk through the entire property with the constable because you can subpoena him to come to court if they sue you over something to do with the condition of the property. I'll go over stories that I went through later, but this is really a rundown of how to, in the most basic format. Also, disclaimer, I am not an attorney. I was a property manager for 20 years, and I managed properties all over South Central Pennsylvania for multiple counties in multiple jurisdictions. And so I'm just telling you what I went through, but I am not an attorney. If you need legal advice, please contact an attorney and get that directly from someone who is representing people in the court of law every day. And so I just want to go over this. Again, this is a process for eviction for residential and commercial properties. Mobile home parks and storage units within my jurisdiction fall under a different set of laws. And so I also wanted to state some other things that you should know. So that's the process, that 14-step process to evict a tenant. You got them out, you changed the locks, but some other things that could come up that I want to point out now inside this video is specifically if a tenant files an appeal. So you have those 10 days before you can file for order for possession, and you have the 11 days until you can actually meet the constable. So within that 21 days, if anything else comes up, just to let you know, that can slow the process down. If they filed for an appeal, that's going to obviously slow this process way down. If they filed an appeal and brought in an attorney to represent them on their appeal, you can expect that this could go on for potentially even a couple of months. This is the typical process. I very rarely ever had, if I ever, I may not never have even had an appeal filed in my 20 years. Most people don't. Hey, they didn't pay their rent. They need to go, and they realize that whether they want to admit it or not. Also, if it's not for non-payment of rent, I did state this earlier, but your notice to quit might look much different, right? Instead of the 10-day notice to quit, you might get into 15 or even 30 days. At one point, this is kind of funny. I said, I don't like this process. It takes too long. And so I started doing 3-day notices to pay rent and quit. The judges don't like that. They want you to do a minimum of, 10 to 15 days. You'll learn what your jurisdiction, the judge within your district magistrate, what that person actually looks for, and you'll have to critique your system to what they generally ask you for. But I feel as though if their rent's due on the first of the month, they need to pay it on the first of the month. Why do we have to give them 10 extra or 15 extra days? Why do we have to give them a 5 or 6 day grace period? Their rent's due on the first. I have bills that are due on the first, and I don't just pay it whenever I feel like it. So the tenant shouldn't be allowed to pay their rent whenever they feel like it, right? The other thing is, specifically, this is for my area. There's so many differences. If you leave the South Central Pennsylvania area and you head to DC, for an example, that's a totally different ballgame, right? Because DC is one of the most tenant-friendly areas you can own properties in, right? It's not to the landlord's advantage by any means. Everything is tenant-friendly set up. The minimum notice to quit is 30 days, and some of them are even 90 or 120 days. So when I gave you the 14-step process to break down to evict a tenant, it's for the area that I live in. Pretty much covers Pennsylvania, but different municipalities may have different rules, and the judge that you get may not actually follow the actual law anyway, because they're going to ask you to do longer notices to quit or something, and you'll learn those as you continue to do it. I guess at points I was a little afraid to go to court because you never know what that judge is going to, especially if it's a new judge you haven't dealt with. But I would tell you, don't ever be timid. I got to the point where, as I was in my career longer and longer, I would not back down from a judge. There's even a judge or two that, I filed judicial complaints against them because I felt they were being unfair to landlords. They're an elected official that has to follow the law. They can't make up their own laws, yet they do. And that's not right. I don't think it's right, when they take several $100s off of someone's rent they owe because you didn't paint a door or something. That's not following the law. But anyway, I could go on forever. So like DC, I already said, their minimum notice to quit is 30 days. And it can take months, even a year, to evict a tenant in DC because the laws are so much different. So you have to look in your municipality. But I hope that my 14-step process that I broke down to you at least gives you some general understanding of what you're going to deal with, what forms you're going to need to pick up, some points along the way of things that I ran into that I learned. Don't miss a hearing. Make sure you have all of your proper documentation that I stated earlier. Make sure you keep proper records so when you show up at court, you look professional, you play the part, you pull out a file folder with organized paperwork. It looks a lot better to a judge when you're organized, because if you're disorganized and the tenant comes in actually organized and maybe with a witness or two, who do you think is going to win? So just use common sense when it comes to this. And if you do things the right way, the judges will see you consistently over a period of time and know that you're not trying to get around any rules. You're following the letter of the law the best you know how. And I think they reward you for that. They realize you're a decent landlord. So even in jurisdictions like DC, sometimes there's certain cases that won't even get through the court system unless you have legal counsel, because there's a lot more laws in places like DC and New York City, and those larger cities. South Central Pennsylvania area is relatively, in my opinion, easy to evict a tenant. And, it's not the funnest thing to do, right? But it's a process that you're going to have to learn as being a landlord. Don't get too wound up about it. After you do it a few times, it becomes second nature, just like anything else you do, right? And so I encourage you just, work through it and you'll do fine. We'll talk about more details and break things down in other forums, in other videos. I hope this is helpful for you. Please comment, subscribe. Feel free to send me a message and I'll respond to questions the best I know how to. We'll figure this out together. Please like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate it. And thanks for viewing this video today.